Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Dustin. So, one of you asked that I review or do a video on The Devils by Dostoevsky. So this will actually be an overview of it, and it'll build on something I've actually written. So I write for the Mallard magazine. This will build on an article I wrote last year called 5 Truths from Dostoevsky's Devils. And I basically go through the book laying out, here's how the things that he presents in this novel that was written in the 1870s really were borne out by history, especially in the 20th century. And that's what that book is. It's a looking forward to what will happen if the ideas that were, if the things that were happening in Russia came to fruition. Basically, he predicted the Soviet Revolution 50 years before it happened. And so, anyway, with such a book, there's a lot to talk about. I'm just going to try to give an overview for this video. I might do more videos, more specifically on different parts of it. But what was Dostoevsky doing? Why was he writing it? Well, part of it was he really liked War and Peace by Tolstoy, and he was like he was reading that. He was in exile for a while to avoid his debts, but he was still getting as much Russian literature as he could. And he really liked War and Peace, but he didn't like how it was simply looking backward. He thought that Tolstoy's venerating and depicting all the ins and outs of the Russian aristocracy, he thought it was ignoring certain things that had really changed in the 1800s. He thought it was a looking back towards something that was never going to be again. What was changing in Russia was this shift from kind of a received romanticism to a more westernized rationalism or naturalism. And this Dostoevsky was one of the group in the 1840s who was kind of raised up by this literary critic named Vissarion Belinsky. Okay, and Belinsky, among others, there's what's his name, Herzen, who actually had to leave the country. He had to go to Europe because of his professed atheism. But they were very much trying to bring these late Enlightenment ideas into Russia to reform it. Now Dostoevsky was originally kind of part of this. In fact, he was down with the at least the social aspects of their version of socialism. That's why he was arrested, and he discovered in prison that none of the upper class intelligentsia's assumptions about socialism or about the peasants or about the relationship of work to life were true. And he spent the rest of his life trying to warn about these misperceptions and these ideas. At the same time, recognizing okay, the young people's hearts who go along with this are usually in the right place. However, he has already written at this point in the 1870s, he already wrote Crime and Punishment, which is about a young man who's a good guy, generally, who is trying to inhabit and live out and take seriously the new atheism that was coming in. And at this time, atheism, utilitarianism, and socialism were synonymous because they were all part of this what Turgenev would call the nihilistic impulse to overthrow the previous generation, right? To reduce to nothing that which was handed down, including all the values and everything like that. It wasn't just they don't believe in anything. There was a patricidal impulse to it, and that's what he really is getting into with kind of these. Now, something else that he did in Crime and Punishment was he showed that the professed utilitarian values of this new sort, these new educated kids who know more than their superstitious parents, actually doesn't have, they aren't the humanitarian motives that even the main character thinks of. In fact, and by the way, a lot of what I talk about with Dostoevsky is very much influenced by Joseph Frank's 5-volume biography on the man, and you can see the rest of them on the bookshelf behind me with that red stripe down the middle. And he just goes through the man's Dostoevsky's whole life to explain how things related to his works. All right, it's all about not just describing his life, but describing how did he create Crime and Punishment? What was at stake for that? Or even before it, the Notes from Underground, which is his first attempt at what would become his main push against this new this radicalism of not of answering the postulates with other postulates. Not he doesn't being from the East, he doesn't accept the premise that, oh, all parts of society can be rationalized or can be dealt with postulates. No, he's orthodox. He understands that no, there's a lot more to us in our actions than in what we say we believe. And so what he started with Notes from Underground and continued through Crime and Punishment, and later on, he would deal with these new ideas not by answering them directly, but by showing, okay, what does it look like for someone to try to live this out? Can they be lived out by a human being, or will it make you something less than a human being? And that's what we see in Crime and Punishment. Joseph Frank, in the volume that talks about it, he actually calls it a detective novel where the criminal himself is the detective, where he's investigating his own motives and discovering that they're not what he thought. That behind the veneer of, oh, I'm going to help society by breaking the rules of murder and killing this pawnbroker, it's going to release everybody's debt and everything. He discovers there was a lot of selfishness and destructive egotism and the desire to tyrannize wrapped up in that. Anyway, his video isn't about crime. Well, in a way, it is about Crime and Punishment, because I think The Devils is an expansion on that theme. It's kind of the spiritual successor to it, and expansion of it, because what The Devils is about is, and it shows that something else that Dostoevsky would do. He would take news articles or things that were happening that you could hear about and be like, oh, well, that's weird, and dismiss them. He would take them and say, these are symptoms of something much worse. Now, what this is about is the Nechaev Affair, okay, which is from the, I believe it's the Agricultural Academy in Moscow. This young man, he and a group of secret revolutionaries, they kill Ivan Ivanov, who is one of their own members. And so Dostoevsky's like, wait a minute, this is weird. Why are they killing one of their own? And why is everyone dismissing this radical as just like, oh, well, you know, young people? He's like, no, they're going to be the old people someday. And so he expands this and he examines it under, okay, what does this mean for society? And that's where we get The Devils. So Dostoevsky, he bridges that gap between the westernizing liberals and the next generation. Okay? Now, at the time, there's largely two groups in Russia. There's the Westernizers, who think all the problems in Russia, we need to deal with them by bringing in other ideas and the things from the Enlightenment. Okay? Now you can actually see elements of this in that show that came out a couple of years ago, The Great, which is kind of a satire of Tsar Peter the Great. Elle Fanning is the queen that brings in ideas from Voltaire and all this stuff. And then there's the Slavophiles, okay, the lovers of the Slav. And their view was that no, if Russia is going to reform, it has to come from within Russia. It has to be organic to Russia, not bringing in other ideas. Now, Dostoevsky, with his magazines, he advocated this idea. It's kind of not necessarily a middle ground, right? It's the view of the second, but appreciating the elements of the first. It is called Pochvenishchestvo. I hope I'm pronouncing that okay. It might be Pochvenishchestva. But the idea of the soil, back to the soil, or if I'm remembering that rightly. But their goal was to get the educated, like either upper class or whatever, to teach the lower classes so that they can rise. All right, instead of no, we're going to abandon everything from outside, or we're going to denigrate everything that's here and bring in Western ideas. His was more of a nuanced middle ground. Although I don't think he was middle ground on some of these issues. There were some ideas that he thought should be stamped out. Because he had said, hey, let's follow that through. Now, one of the ideas that really he does in Crime and Punishment, and he shows it in this very enigmatic dream scene at the end, it was this idea of rational egotism, which had been explored by Turgenev, I believe, in Fathers and Sons. and then also in What Is to Be Done by Chernyshevsky, which is one of the most influential polemical novels ever written. Even though Dostoevsky was like, this is a crap novel, because the utilitarians they only see the only use of art because they deny everything transcendent, or they either ignore it or just say it doesn't exist. So art is not something that unites you to something higher or gives you the ability to stand difficult situations. All these things that are the romantics would have handed down, and that Dostoevsky would actually rediscover in orthodoxy, the idea that beauty can save you. But they denied this whole thing, and they said, oh, the only reason for art is politics, is propaganda. Okay, we've heard that, right? That's actually one of my 5 truths from the Devils article, which I'll link below, by the way. But the egotism, the rational egotism that replaces to replace everything, he explores it at the end of this, when Raskolnikov has this dream about the whole world turning against itself and becoming selfish and all this stuff. And it's a very confusing dream, because it's a dream. Dostoevsky rarely explains his dreams, all right? But you could argue that he's showing what will the world be like if this idea takes on, or it takes hold. So, and he explores that more in The Devils. So we get 2 generations. We're finally 15 minutes in, getting to how to read The Devils. It starts by talking about the older generation. All right, we get Stepan Trofimovich Verkhovinsky, and he was a professed liberal, but although he has to keep correcting people, no, that doesn't mean I'm an atheist. What are you talking about? But you can see in that, like, how these ideas kind of became synonymous. But he was on the forefront of academia and all this stuff in the 40s and 50s, but now he's basically a lost man. He's kind of bumming around. He's had this kind of forlorn relationship with Madame Stavrogina, and he doesn't do anything about it. They're both in love with each other, but he's like, oh no, I'm going to be this celibate academic or something like that, and then she resents him for it, but still lets him stay at her house and stuff because she's an aristocrat. There's also that like class element to it. It's like, come on, grow up, dude. But he's the face of this older liberal class who were like very educated and wanted to shake things up a little bit, but they weren't radical. No, we don't advocate throwing over things. We're just wanting to make things a little better. Which Dostoevsky, although he kind of presents him like an idiot, he is still sympathetic to it, because that's Dostoevsky's generation. All right, he gets it. All right, Stepan Trofimovich is very much an ambivalent character, but he becomes the character through whom we experience the book's anagnorisis, the realization. All right, anagnorisis is this idea. It's the moment in a story when the character realizes something, and he discovers his true place in the world, or his true circumstances. If you can see it, now sometimes it's good, sometimes it's Hamlet saying, I am he, Hamlet the Dane. He is recognizing and accepting his responsibilities. Or it can be King Lear realizing that he's nothing but a fool and that his daughter is dead because of him. And it's a character seeing things as they really are. And we get that through him. So he's not simply a old guy to be dismissed. But because he was, the way he lived his life and stuff, just kind of like, oh, kind of whatever, kind of romanticizing the non-romantic generation, the generation that was moving towards a more naturalism or whatever, he wasn't the best father. And so we get him and his son, Pyotr Stepanovich. And his son is actually the Nechaev of the book. Spoiler alert. All right, he's the one that's leading this secret group of revolutionaries, and they end up trying to plot to get rid of a guy who left their group, who switched from being a Westernizer to being a Slavophile, and that's Ivan Shatov. He's a peasant who lives on the Stavrogin estate. So through the Devils, you need to read it through this lens of 2 generations. Now, one of the things that happens is, and let me actually read you something. This is from Nikolai Strakhov, who was a friend of Dostoevsky's, and he became one of his first biographers. And this is Joseph Frank's The Miraculous Years, which covers a lot of just great stuff. It's aptly named. Strakhov sees contemporary Russian nihilism as a direct consequence of the influence of such pure Westerners like Stepan Trofimovich, even though the surviving members of that generation refuse to recognize their offspring in the impure progeny they have engendered. All right? So we see through the book this theme that, oh, that's not what we wanted to produce. Even though it's from Dostoevsky's perspective, you could argue that he's saying it's a direct result of it. Pyotr Stepanovich is not corrupting the ideas, he's following them through. He's following through with this nihilistic, and this nihilism and I might do a video on Pyotr Stepanovich too, because he's a very fascinating character. He's both small and big at the same time. But that's how we want to see this book, is this shift between two generations, and the first generation does not want to look at what the younger generation is doing. And through the book, by assuming the best of the young ones, we see the older generation enable them. And like, oh, it's okay. We can redirect their energy, and the younger ones, led by Pyotr Stepanovich, use the resources and the clout of the older generation to effect their kind of little local revolution. And that gets into a huge theme that Dostoevsky will continue in Brothers Karamazov. The idea that revolution, a nihilistic revolution in these, like radicalism, is at its basis a patricide. It's the rebellion against the father. It's a rebellion against the previous generation. And he links it, I mean, in the Brothers Karamazov, and in this, all right, the name is Devils. Really, although really the Russian word besi is the possessors. So really sometimes it's translated as the possessed, but it's talking about the ideas that possess us. We think, and this is also Dostoevsky talking about maybe a commentary on the Enlightenment idea that, oh, we can just the kind of liberal Enlightenment idea that you can just pick and choose ideas. And he's like, throughout this book, no, there's actually ideas that they pick us and they eat us. And I could go into that with a study of Kirilov, who gets so obsessed with an idea that it swallows him. That's how Pyotr Stepanovich describes it to him. And so Dostoevsky is talking about ideas that they are active things. So he puts all of this, just this one local event, all right, in a Russian province, actually has to do with the larger issue of children replacing their parents. He definitely places, look, this desire to overthrow like economics and culture, and as an atheistic push to try to overthrow God. I mean, that goes straight back to the garden, all right? And so this one little story, he shows how the greater significance that in this little thing that people might have read it in the paper and been like, well, that's horrific, and then gone about their day. He's like, no, this is something that we need to deal with. And that's why it's very interesting to read it in response to War and Peace. As a kind of, which is Tolstoy kind of looking back and being like, oh, look at the greatness, and as well as the effects. I mean, Tolstoy's not simply a romantic; he's not a romantic at all in a lot of ways, because his characters don't actually reach moments of transcendence. They always kind of stub their toe on the way to it, which is one of my reservations with Tolstoy. But Dostoevsky, this is him putting on war paint and being like, no, what's coming is a lot worse than what's been. If we don't address it and know about it. Anyway, I'm running a bit long. Thank you guys for sticking around this long. If you have any specific questions about the book, put them down below. All right, like I said, I'm planning on doing more videos on the topic, and I'll talk more about how these ideas how he concretizes them. Anyway, you guys have a great day. Thanks for hanging out.